Good morning, everyone. I have a quick announcement before we get started. I'd like to introduce a new, what's a good word for it? New procedure, a new methodology. Thank you, hon. So I'm Jill Marie, responsible for the cleaning at the center. I'm the cleaning coordinator, Ferry. And so we've had some issues with having consistent volunteer responsibilities for people to come in. So real quickly, we're going to introduce right after the service today, the clean machine. And all you have to do is grab, you don't take it, but I'll have some little pins and you just vacuum and then you get to go. Clean one thing and then you get to leave. So you can stay and talk if you want. But that's all it is you just pick one thing, like say wipe the countertops down in the fridge door, the cabinet doors, 2.4 minutes. You can time it and tell me it was good or not, if that was the right time. Dust the shelves and the books in the lobby real quick. So this way we're all taking part in it and it'll all get done much easier and smoother. And we hope that this is a project that can we can all get used to, and that's how we'll get the center clean. Since, as you've heard before, it is not a self-cleaning oven.
And I don't hear myself. Okay, thank you. I just, first of all, welcome our guests who are here. And also want to remind you all that it's just really an amazing and wonderful blessing to have a teacher of the quality of Venerable George here while Geshe-la is away. He's extremely knowledgeable. He's been a monk for nearly 40 years, studied with Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and he's just bringing a lot of wonderful new insights. It's always good to hear the Dharma from new teachers, and it opens up new doors that hadn't been opened before. So if you are enjoying having him here, we would appreciate any support. We do have sponsorships available. And when you sponsor, we'll take your dedication and read it and share it with everyone else. And also, if you just are moved from your heart to give it at any level, we're happy to receive that. So thank you.
So in a moment, Venerable George Churinoff will be coming into this door. If you've never been to the center, I know we have guests from Mount Meredith and Guilford College. If you please stand out of respect for him and his teachings, you'll see him prostrate. And then afterwards, many of us will be prostrating. And if you feel uncomfortable doing so, please just remain standing. In the first session, Venerable George asked people for opinions, comments, and questions, and so forth. And if he does, we are streaming this, so please wait until you get the handheld microphone to respond, because people, no matter how loudly you speak, people on the internet cannot hear you, and many people are not able to come for some reason or another. So they want to, participate in this session. So if you would please do that. This morning, Venerable George spoke about meditation, especially about the beneficial state of compassion. So we can look forward to that. We have two sponsors. Hannah Yosef, I dedicate the teaching to all sentient beings whose minds are weighed down by depression, and to Geshe-la's long, healthy, happy life. Pat Long is another sponsor to welcome Venerable George Churinoff to the Kadampa Center, and an anonymous sponsor for the long, healthy, happy lives of our dear teachers who show us the path through word and example, and out of their vast kindness will be with us and all sentient beings along the entire path to enlightenment.
Nice.
So if you would please take the white prayer book. If you're sitting at the pew, it's way at the end of the pews. And turn to the first base sheet. And we'll chant Shakyamuni Buddha's mantra 3 times. And then the 4 measurables in English. Taya ta om mune mune maha munaye soha. Taya ta om mune mune maha munaye soha. Tayata om mune mune maha munaye soha. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. And if you'll turn the page to the first pink sheet, at the bottom there are 2 mantras. Let's say Chenrezig's mantra 8 times, and then Green Tara's mantra 7 times. Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum, 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 Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Taritu Taritu Re Soha. 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 Okay, now the children are welcome to go to their classes.
Oops. Great socks, huh? Good morning. If you like, there's some seats closer up. If you feel you'd like to get closer, you can come up. You don't have to feel. And sometimes when I teach some philosophical classes, and sort of like a class over many days, I say you have to sit, but you're here of your own volition. So there's some up here. If you right? You can be right in the forefront of things. Yeah. There you go. And okay. So are you comfortable without a cushion behind you? Yeah. Okay. There's one. It's helpful that she's going to hand you a cushion. It's helpful to put underneath your spine, just sort of under, to help, even if you're used to sitting on a flat floor, because that way you can, there won't be any pain of the muscles in your lower back trying to keep your back erect. So I mentioned in the first talk, in the churches, often the minister or the preacher will say, "Let us pray," right? So I say, "Let us meditate." So just quietly, anyone here who's never meditated before? Couple, okay. Are there some college students, college classes? But you've all meditated. No one raised their hand. Okay, that's great. Okay, so I'll give some instruction. Just sit comfortably with your spine erect, and in the same sense of just passively watching that you would do if I said, listen. You don't have to make a sound. You just passively listen. Passively watch or be aware of your breathing. Don't get involved in controlling it. Watch when it's going in, when it's changing direction, when it's going out. Really in very much detail, to the exclusion of all the other chatter, the other thoughts that are going through your mind. As you continue watching your breathing, you can add some factors to this. As you breathe out naturally, imagine that all of the tension in your body, I heard someone sighing a moment ago, like relaxing. Imagine the tension in your body being expelled with your exhalation. You can even imagine it in the form of black smoke going out, going far away so that you don't inhale it again. In addition to the tension in your body, you can imagine expelling uncomfortable states of mind. If you have any resentment or anger or attachment that's distracting you, or just generally a mind that's distracted to thoughts, imagine that the energy upon which those thoughts depend, the nervous energy, is breathed out in the form of black smoke. You can imagine breathing out your low self-esteem, your depression, unhappiness. Actually, a meditation like this does have some result. Great meditators use a more elaborate, more advanced meditation like this to prepare for deeper kinds of practices. On the inhalation, you can imagine breathing in the white energy. If you have a Buddhist inclination, you can imagine the blessings of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas entering into your body in the form of white light, filling you up, burning up the negative energy that you then expel as black smoke on the exhalation. In white, virtuous, faith-producing energy, expel all of the defiled energy on the exhalation. If you have no no affiliation with Buddhism, you can imagine breathing in the inspiration of Christ or the Hindu deities or the Godhead, all of their blessings filling up your body, burning up the negative energy, and breathing out our defiled energy, even our tension, our anger, our own self-pitying mind. And then bring your attention back to the present and relax. Hopefully you were relaxed anyway. But any observations? Anyone have any? How was your meditation? Anyone who had not meditated before have anything that? I saw some hands in the back there. Anyone? No? Don't be shy. Okay, you don't have to answer. So, continuing on from a little theme that I had been talking about last week. Can you hear me okay? So, last week we were talking about the meaning of, in Buddhism, of love and how to meditate on love. We were talking about meditation in general, how to meditate on love. Just to remind you, and I noticed on the talk that the resident teacher here, Geshe Gelik, his last lecture, he said he always mentioned the same thing every lecture about what meditation meant. The Indian word for meditation and the Tibetan equivalent of that means basically to familiarize or to become, have something become a habit, to familiarize with a wholesome state. You all know what wholesome food is, right? Food that's good for you. So you could say, when we talk about mental states of mind, you could say that some are beneficial or wholesome, and some are not, that are actually problematic. What do you think about anger? Is anger a problematic mind or a beneficial mind? There's some seats up here. There's one. Yeah. What do you think? Problematic. Okay. Anyone think anger is? You don't have to feel like, well, I'm not going to say I think anger is good, but I'm not going to say. What do you think? What do you think, this gentleman? Yeah. Well, yeah. Either. Not positive in you. Yeah. Okay, that's what I wanted to hear. Someone defending anger. Okay. With a nice stern face. Anger can be motivation to change. Okay. Anyone? What's your name? Kirsten. Anyone agree with Kirsten? Good. Okay, that's what I want. Okay, now, don't be shy. I gave a talk in. There was this one seminar I gave in Tokyo one time on Buddhist meditation. There's so many stories from it. But anyway, after the course, during the course, people were very hesitant to ask any question or even answer a question. If I'd ask them, they would just like they were a statue of the Buddha, they didn't. And after the course was over, they came up to me and they said, Bhante, which is a term of respect for the clergy, in Asian. Bhante, we'd like to have a party to celebrate the end of the seminar. It had been a weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I think. And I said, okay, that's okay. Well, we can do. And they said, but Bhante, we'd like to have our traditional drink of sake. I asked what that was, and some kind of inebriating alcohol drink. And I said, well, generally, Buddhists don't, the clergy has a vow against intoxicating liquids and so forth. But in general, we don't celebrate with alcohol in our, just in parties. And they said, but Bhante, we always have sake. So I tried to think skillful means. I said, okay, you can have some sake. They weren't ordained or anything. So during the party, the people that had been so hesitant to ask questions, they came up with so many questions. Then I realized why they drink sake. It eliminates the inhibitions and so forth. So when people have inhibitions to ask questions, I sometimes say, once they understand what I mean, I say, pass the sake. Just the mental sake, so you can, okay, I'm going to ask anything now. So I'm glad that you came up. So it's interesting. Anger, we might think my anger protects me, for one side. If I didn't have anger, people would just take advantage of me. Could that be a reason someone might think? Maybe resonate with something. If I didn't have anger, if I gave up my anger, became one of these Buddhists, people would take advantage of me. That's not a good strategy. I don't want to become a Buddhist. Or you might think, as you said, that anger has some positive qualities. How did you say, Kirsten? Say, it is a motivation to change, or it manifests, or it can bring about change, or it is, anyway, like that. And how would some of the others who agreed with her, how else would you phrase it? Could you put a slightly different verbalization? Yeah, back there.
I guess I feel that by accepting and acknowledging your anger, you have a better understanding of yourself. Like you'd have to examine what that anger like will cause to change in the future or past for you. You know, you can't really change the future. So, you know, what are you going to be angry about in the future? And then, you know, obviously you can't change the past, but by
Okay.
realizing what's made you angry, you can, you know, learn more about yourself.
Okay. So it can help you to learn about yourself. But then once you've learned about yourself, that advantage of anger is gone, right? Once you've learned a bit about yourself. Okay. Anything else? Yeah.
I teach us about anger in prisons and stuff like that. And so we were teaching from the Dalai Lama's book, Healing Anger. And there the Dalai Lama said that anger is appropriate. It's okay. I'm paraphrasing, of course. It's appropriate. It's okay if there is no attachment to the anger. The problem with our anger is that we have attachment, right? So it's always coming from this place of I. You know, what have you done to me? And I, you know, you hurt me, and this kind of stuff. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. His whole generally in Buddhism, we say you have to be very careful and it's about anger, because what we think of as advantages of anger, we have to investigate what anger actually is. Anger is a state of mind where the mind has become uncontrolled and it wants to express itself verbally or physically, or if not, it has to be restrained in, you know, like, you know, teachers, you had to write on the board, I will not chew gum in school 100 times, and you can't say anything to the teacher or else it'll be 1,000 times, and you have to hold it in, but that anger is still there, right? Like the Jack in the Box, you know, just ready for some, you go home and you snap at baby sister or baby brother and mother doesn't understand why you're, you know, that manifestation came out. Anger from a Buddhist perspective is not good. You know, we'll talk about this. We'll try to address these other issues in respect to what His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, said. Sometimes His Holiness has said, you know, he talks about his childhood, how sometimes he'd be angry about something, but it'd be short-lived. Generally, our anger, because we rehearse it again and again, can you get an idea what I mean by that? We become, it's almost like we meditate on it. You know, we do it so often, it becomes a habit. We become familiarized with it. If it's something that you just get, you know, you just bark once in a while, darn it, you know, or some little stronger one in the traffic jam or something, that's one thing. But the kind of anger that festers, that is fueled by what remind me, Andre, that Andre was talking about, that is fueled by some sense of ego and, you know, like this. That's more problematic. Occasionally, we're going to get angry. There's nothing to. It's not as though once becoming a Buddhist, you will never get angry. You know, or is it like someone was saying? I remember at one meditation course in Nepal, some Westerner, after the course, they were asked if they were thinking to become a Buddhist, and they said, "No, I can't become a Buddhist." And asked why not, and said, "Oh, Buddhists can't have fun." You know, we talk about, you know, as though you try to develop a state of renunciation. Let me tell you, Buddhists can have fun. There's no limit on fun. It's how you deal with fun, how you deal with enjoyment. If you deal with it with attachment, the same thing, how you deal with something which is irritating to you. If you actually recognize that, let's say you see injustice, like to Kirsten's observation that it can be an agent of change. Could I paraphrase what you said? If you recognize that when you see injustice in the world or toward individuals or something that is incorrectly done, you know, like the uh, endangerment of our environment and so forth. Recognizing that and feeling the incorrectness of that, you might allow your ego to get involved and to really get angry and plan, attacks. Like remember the early day, maybe still people go to laboratories and blow them up and plan different kinds of violent demonstrations and so forth. Once when I gave a course in India at our meditation center there, Tushita, there were a lot of Israelis, people that had been in the Israeli army. So they were just a little older than you college students, I think, maybe about the same age. In Israel, there's a mandatory, both men and women, I think, right, have to serve in the armed forces for some time. And when I began to talk about anger and its antidote, compassion, some of them, the next session, a couple of the guys didn't come. I spent a session talking about compassion. The next session, it was like a week course, many sessions during the day. They didn't come. And after some time, I asked their girlfriends, who were also the course, why these guys were not there. And they said, Ari had been in the army and he had been trained not to have compassion for the Palestinians, because otherwise in interrogation or on the street, they could be taken advantage of. You had to be very, how to say, keep your resentment toward people, be suspicious and so forth. And one has to watch. I mentioned in the next lecture, I said, please ask them to come back. I wanted to explain a little bit more about compassion, that there's a difference between being, when there's in some endangering situation, there's a difference between being angry and being vigilant. Like, say, for instance, you can, interrogating a prisoner that might be violent or something like that, you can be vigilant but still within that state be compassionate toward the person. Or you could be vigilant and be angry and ready to strike out immediately. From a Buddhist perspective, you shouldn't just let the world walk over you. Just if the taxi driver gives you change, you give them a $50 bill and they give you change for $5. You know what I mean? Has that ever happened to you? Something like that. You should be still, you can still be, excuse me, I gave you a 50, you can still be adamant and vigilant in everything without letting your mind get distracted into anger. The reason is anger itself is a state of mind when you lose your clarity. So if you see injustice, you want to be vigilant, but you want to be wise and to use that energy to analyze the situation and try to find skillful ways to rectify it, rather than falling prey to our habit of getting angry, where the clarity of your mind becomes muddled, the peacefulness of your mind becomes muddled. Do you notice that when you're angry, it's difficult to make the right decision? You may, in an angry state, you may say words to your friends, your family, that you regret later, maybe even immediately. And those words, those harsh words, can break a very wonderful relationship that's been developed over a long period of time, sometimes years, decades. Some sharp words can destroy that in a short time due to anger. We can strike out. You hear people, I think Andre and others have told me about people, others that have worked with people in prison, Herb Cunningham, others, that talked about the prisoners that were there for murder, saying how they didn't plan, they went into a bar and they were just, someone spilled beer on them and they just stabbed the other person out of anger. They weren't planning the murder. There were probably plenty of people who plan crimes and so forth, professional criminals, but a lot of people, due to their anger, they do things that their whole life changes. Can you imagine? It's quite, it's quite clear. So there's a difference between anger and a mind that recognizes injustice, let's say, and tries to channel that, that urge that's starting to come up into wisdom and keeping the mind calm. Because if you allow the mind to become upset, you're not able to really affect a good change. Okay, so that's my 2 cents worth, okay? My Buddhist 2 cents worth. The reason I bring up this subject about anger, and it's very common that some people will think anger is good. It's part of my arsenal. I'm not going to give up my anger. People will take advantage of me and so forth. You don't have to worry about that because you can still be vigilant. Just don't let yourself get carried away. One of the ways to counteract your anger, to learn how to control it, is to meditate on compassion. Compassion. Do you all know what compassion means? Anyone that doesn't know, the word doesn't resonate? Yes. Oh, okay, good. There's the answer directly. Yeah. So compassion, and if I were to ask you, there might be different kinds of opinions of what compassion means, but from a Buddhist perspective, compassion has a particular meaning. Compassion means yourself empathizing with the other with other individuals, because compassion is towards living beings, putting yourself in their shoes, so to speak, and feeling that the suffering that they're undergoing or the hardship, whatever, shouldn't be there. In the same way that you yourself wouldn't like to experience that suffering, they should not be experiencing that suffering. Generating a thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if they were free of suffering and the causes of suffering? By whatever means, okay? Does that make some sense? The word compassion, compassion, comes about from feeling along with, right? I think in, does anyone know German here? German language? Is it Mitgefühl? I taught some courses once in Switzerland and Germany, and I think they don't have a lot of, in German, interestingly enough, there are not a lot of words for love and compassion. Different, it's like they say the Eskimos have many words for white, the color white, different shades of white, and in the Amazon, the natives that live in that region have many names for the different shades of green. And if you actually look at the trees, actually you say, wow, we don't have names usually in English. Maybe around here you do. Do you have different names for different shades of green here? We're not quite. You do? Yeah. Oh, okay. So you're native. You're you're a real North Carolinians. Okay, I'll have to remember that. North Carolinians claim they have different names. Do you have names, or do you just recognize the different shades?
Nationally, there's different shades of green that I use to describe different shades of trees and grass and
yeah. Okay.
moss.
Yeah, these are things we recognize. Yeah, we might recognize them, but may not have names, but we do recognize. So I thought it was a little bit funny that the Germans didn't have a lot of words for love and compassion. But Mitgefühl, I think, meant to feel along with also. So, so to put I mentioned in the earlier talk this morning, there was a book I remember reading with Lama Osel, the reincarnation of Lama Yeshe. Lama Yeshe's picture is up from your point of view, to the left of the Dalai Lama up there. Was the founder of the FPMT. When he passed away, a little boy in Spain was identified as his reincarnation, and I had the pleasure and good fortune to honor, to teach him for a couple of years at the monastery. At one point, I was teaching him Western subjects. At one point, we read a book, kid's book, because he was young at the time. Something, and maybe you would have, if your parents, you would have run across it, or if you were young, you might have read it when you were younger. Something like Walking Two Moons or something like that. And it was talking about Native American, that you couldn't really know another person's experiences until you walked in their moccasins for 2 moons. Does that ring a bell with you? Yeah. That was the name? There you go. Saren Creech, if you want to get that one. Okay, something like that. Anyway, putting yourself in another person's situation voluntarily and feeling the discordance of that, how that, how you yourself, if you were experiencing that, how you'd feel. Anyone here like to feel suffering? Mostly not, right? I mean, you might say, I know a masochist who likes to suffer, but usually there's some psychological aberration. Usually there's someone, they're trying to punish themselves or something. Generally, it's a common trait of all living beings, all sentient beings, that we want to avoid suffering and we want to experience happiness, right? So if you put yourself in another person's shoes, you walk in their moccasins, so to speak, or you feel along with them what they're experiencing, you yourself might feel, I don't want to experience that. Wouldn't it be wonderful if I were to have that I could be free of that? So you can begin to make a first step in understanding compassion. Wouldn't it be wonderful if they were free from that? Now, we have a lot of resistance to feeling for others. We're just thinking of number one. I was told, what was it? Someone said, look out for number one was a expression some years ago, right? Number one meaning yourself, right? Your own ego, your own existence. Why should you care about other people's sufferings? And that's very prevalent kind of sentiment. I like to look at things on the internet, I have to admit. And when I read articles, I've fallen prey to reading the comments afterwards. Have you ever done that? Oh my gosh. There is so much anger and vitriol and just, whoa, it's so hard to find some reasoned, answers to questions. People usually go into incredible, verbal diarrhea about all of these, whatever happens to be bothering them. And there's a tendency not to care about other people's sufferings. We see that in the national arena, in our own communities, in our lives. So how could Buddhism, what could Buddhism offer to be able to change the mind to think about other sufferings and wish that they were free of that, which somehow we might have a feeling, if we were to study the teachings of Buddha, or if we study Christianity, is a virtue, compassion. Is that not considered a virtue in Christianity? In Judaism? Anyone here Jewish? Hindu? Anyone Hindu? Muslim? Any Muslim? Generally in Islam also, I think, all religions, compassion is considered to be a virtue. So how could we, in our meditative state, meditation is a means to familiarize the mind quickly with a wholesome state, such as compassion. How do we go about that? You just sit and say, compassion, compassion. That's not meditation on compassion. Maybe a little bit closer is just to say the phrase, how wonderful it would be if everyone was free of suffering and the causes of suffering. There, at least, it's enunciated and you can try to have that thought. Wouldn't that be wonderful? But then coming up from maybe very close to the surface of the mind, there's these little devil's advocates. No, it's not the right term. Little devils. You're not that are saying, no, forget about it. If that's their problem. They brought it on by themselves, right? What other kind of devils would come up? Serves them right. Yeah, they deserve it. Exactly. Sometimes when we get angry, we might, if someone said, why did you get angry at them? Why did you slap or beat the kids or those people? And we would use as an excuse exactly that. They needed that to kind of legitimize our anger. Does that make, have you seen that happen sometime? They needed that, or as you said, they deserve that. Even if we didn't inflict the damage, just they're experiencing it. We can think they deserve that. Like people that are executed. In North Carolina, are there executions? Yeah, there's some states that are not. I think Texas leads the list. I remember some years ago, I was doing a meditation retreat in the New Mexico high desert near the Colorado border, and there was it was in the house of a very wealthy benefactor, and there was once in a while there was a TV channel that would come in, and I was watching Oprah in the afternoon one time, just having tea, and there was an interview with the senator. I think he was senator, or no, the former governor of Texas at the time, George W. Bush, and she was asking him about the fact that there were so many executions in Texas. Wasn't there a possibility some of them were innocent? Did anyone remember that interview? It was very famous. You remember, what did he say? Oh, you're from Texas. Yeah. He said, for your vocabulary of Texas, he said, no, every single one of them was guilty. There was never anyone was executed that wasn't guilty. And, it's just blew my mind at the time, Not only talking about lack of compassion, but the certainty that they deserved it. Sometimes they don't deserve it. We see many situations, isn't it, where people have been wrongly incarcerated. They never committed some crime. So how can we overcome these kinds of devilish minds? They're kinds of conceptions in our mind that are preventing us from developing realizations. So we have to use. Sometimes it just comes about because of life experiences, but generally, if you use reasoning in your meditation, what we call analytical meditation, you can find ways to overcome that and actually develop a positive, compassionate state of mind. Let me give you some examples. First of all, if your hesitancy to have compassion for others comes down to, I'm just concerned with my own, if that's their problem, I'm just concerned with myself. To recognize that if there was less suffering outside, and if other people were free of suffering and the instigating causes and conditions of suffering, bad neighborhoods and poverty and so forth, that there would be less crime. You could walk down the street without fear of being molested or robbed and so forth. What is it like around here? Probably pretty safe around here, right? Depends on where you are. I asked in the other class if anyone left their house unlocked, and I think only 2 people said, anyone here leave your house unlocked all the time? You live in the countryside? No? Okay. You? Who was the other one back there? You left your house unlocked? You live in the countryside? You live in Cary? No, I'm just curious. Do you live in the city? No, I'm not keeping track. I'm not planning any burglaries. Don't be afraid. I'm not going to tell him I leave my house and he's going to come and steal my coffee pot. I lived in the western part of North Carolina, north of Asheville, about 30 miles north of Asheville, and I probably could leave my house unlocked for the 5 weeks I'm here, but I did lock it. So if there was less discontent, if there was no discontent, if other people were free of suffering or the causes of suffering, there wouldn't be people on the street possibly aiming to steal and rob. There wouldn't be the same kinds of worries about being cheated when you go to buy the used car. That may not resonate with some of you, but anyway, many times we feel that we're in danger of being taken advantage of other people, being taken advantage by other people, because those people have some different agenda. Generally, the mind that wants to hurt others or take advantage is because of some kind of discontent. If people were basically happy and had the causes of happiness, and I don't mean just worldly causes, they had lots of money, but they really had good state of mind. That's what's meant here. Wouldn't it be wonderful if others were free of suffering and the causes of suffering? Their minds were content. We would, number one, would profit from that. There'd be less disharmony. You'd see people smiling at you rather than scowling or ignoring you. We would feel more loved and secure. That alone can be a very positive reason to counteract certain kinds of knots in your mind, certain like devils that wants to think, doesn't matter that others are suffering. Now, as the world is becoming more interdependent, more apparently independent, there's always been interdependent, but now it's becoming more like the global village. Have you heard that expression? What happens to the economy in another country is not an isolated effect. That within minutes on the United States stock market, things change because people are so interdependent. Whether the crop of sugar in Cuba or some other country has a bad year or a good year affects us immediately. Rather than thinking, oh, the British pound, the British are experiencing bad economic times. Good, we have to think, well, that will have effects on us, negative effects on us. Even if the Chinese economy or someone that we might consider to be a competitor is lowered, that means there's less people to buy the products that are manufactured here. So even thinking in that regard, there is more at this time as we recognize that interconnectedness more. We realize that when others experience suffering, whether they be individuals or communities or nations, that we ourselves, there are repercussions on us that are often negative, not positive. There might be some momentary elation, that that it's good for us that the others are suffering, but over some period of time, we recognize that there's something negative for us. So that's one reason you can use. Okay, does that make sense to you? Deeper sense. Other reasons that you can do. To try to identify with others on a deeper sense, in the sense that we're all human beings, just in the same way that I feel discomfort when I lose, when I'm abused, when I'm in a traffic jam, or when I'm incarcerated, or I've been disciplined, or whatever. The very same way others, when they experience suffering, they feel the same discomfort, the same suffering. Putting yourself in their shoes voluntarily, you can start to think, wouldn't it be wonderful that they were free of that? Okay, so this particular kind of logic is called equalizing yourself and others. It has very great and profound reasons, but to be able to actualize that takes a little bit of a little more knowledge. Say, for instance, understanding about the Buddhist concept of egolessness. Have you heard of that? Egolessness? Have you heard? No? Selflessness? Well, selflessness can sometimes mean just being the selfless person working for others. But when we talk about the lack of a self-identity, that might be a bit foreign to some of you. To Buddhist practitioners who come all the time, it's something that's part and parcel of our understanding of the Buddhist teaching. There is a sense of your own identity, and I'm pointing here to like deep within the mental consciousness, that thinks I, that thinks of your own identity as a certain sense of being the owner of your body and mind, like me. In Christian terms, in let's say the peoples of the book, I guess I'd have to say, because they all three of the great religions, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, all talk about the soul, right? Different interpretations, what happens after death, whether the soul goes to heaven or hell. In Judaism, it's not so clear, and in Islam, different views from Christianity, but they talk about the soul. There's a sense of some kind of, you could say soul, or in the Indian language, they say Atma, that is continuing, is maybe independent of the body and mind, but somehow interacts with it, controls it. Do you have that kind of feeling? Like, for instance, when you put chocolate in your mouth, do you put it in your mouth to set it that your tongue consciousness will experience pleasant taste, or that you will experience Hershey's, or what was that famous one? My dad always liked Almond Joy. Do they still make Almond Joy? It's coconut and almonds. When you toss some pizza in the mouth or chew on pizza, is it so that your tactile consciousness will feel the crunch, or your taste buds will feel that, or is it so that you will taste the pizza, or experience the Budweiser, or whatever you're doing? Or it's for you, right? Who is you? Who is that I that you're thinking of? Without investigation, it seems like it's definitely there. In fact, in some of the Christian theologians in earlier times, when to try to prove the existence of the soul, it was as though there was no proof necessary because it was just so apparent. I think what is that so apparent is that sense of the I, what in Buddhism is sometimes referred to as the object to be investigated, that is to eventually be proved to not exist. You do exist. I mean, what is your name? Sonia. Sonia exists. Do you mind if I use your example? Maybe the ego will. I was the example. I'm just teasing. just teasing. So there's a sense in Sonia's mind of, and I'm not going out on a limb here. We all have the same kind of experience in our mind. There's a sense of your own self-identity. I am the owner of the body and mind, the controller, the experiencer. When you have nice clothes on, cashmere sweater or something, I am experiencing that. Someone, not just the body consciousness, but as though an independent agent, an I, self, behind the body and mind. From a Buddhist perception, that sense that Andre referred to when he was quoting the Dalai Lama before, but talking about the ego, sometimes we can call that the ego, the sense of the ego, although psychologists may have their own definition of ego. That definitely appears, but like the example I gave last week was Santa Claus. Do you remember? Did I talk about Santa Claus last week? Maybe that was over the seminar yesterday. You know, when Uncle Charlie comes down the stairs dressed as Santa Claus, the kids see Santa Claus, and they see Santa Claus and they believe it's Santa Claus, right? Is that really Santa Claus? I don't want to burst anyone's bubble here, that's actually devoid of being really Santa Claus, right? It appears as Santa Claus, but is devoid of Santa Claus. The older kids, when they get to be, nowadays, I don't know how old when they learn there's no Santa Claus, 9, 8. How old were you when you discovered that Santa Claus wasn't existing? 16? Who said? I'm teasing. Did you say 16? No, yeah, you. Yeah. No. Oh, okay, no, not me. I knew. Oh, you know what? This is an example. Or like an echo. I've told a story here once before when I was saying mantra in front of our monastery in Wisconsin late at night. I was walking down the road, and there was this dog, nasty dog, that would come out and bark. And then there would it was late at night, and it was like cloudy night, and off in the distance, it seemed like another dog would answer. You know how the dogs sometimes, another dog would answer, and another dog would answer. And then I'd walk further, and this dog would bark, and that one would go bark, and that one would bark. Always like that. These guys would never keep barking, never bark by themselves. And then I stopped to think, and I recognized there was no dogs over there. It actually was an echo of this dog's bark. You understand what I'm saying? And one of the great examples from the Buddhist scriptures about recognizing the falsity of the ego came to mind, because they say that phenomena are one of the examples. Not only are they like illusions that don't really exist or whatever, they're like echoes. You know, an echo is something that you might imagine to have its own independent source of sound. You know, there was really a dog there, but is actually devoid of that, is empty of that existence. Does that make sense? The echo was, what was coming from there was empty of being created by a dog, you could say. There was no dog there as my mind had conceived. So in that same way, once you have understood that the self that we've been cherishing, number one, that we've been taking care of, that we do everything for, we eat the chocolate, the pizza, the Budweiser, we work so hard to get recognition and love for I. When you recognize that I doesn't exist the way that it appears, it's an illusion, your heart can start to open up and start to recognize that you can start to identify with others rather than just identifying with this body and mind. Then you can start to equalize yourself with others. If there's suffering in someone else's, let's say an example, I want to use my left foot here. So if there's a thorn in the left foot, there's no hesitancy for the right hand to take that out, right? Or is there? Does the right hand say, "No, that's your problem"? We're all part of one. We impute I, that the sense of I pervades the whole body, right? What if your sense of I pervaded the whole community? Your sense of identity pervaded all living beings. If there's suffering there, you would naturally want it to be eliminated. You would have the compassion for others. So that's a very profound reason, equality with others. Or you can recognize how things are changeable. Another reasoning for compassion. Anyone ever have an enemy who later became your friend? Only one? Come on. I bet there's probably many times, if you think about it, even your friends now, you were angry at them, and you might have even thought, ignored them, and they were a mini enemy maybe for a while or something like that. They don't have to be a full-fledged horn-bearing enemy or something like that. How about friends that later became distant from you, enemies? Does that also happen? Yeah, sometimes when people get married, sometimes if they have a bad breakup, they Oftentimes they remain friends, but sometimes you hear stories of people become, you know, fighting over the possessions and hating each other and everything, enemies. All of these things can change. How about this? Your friends, your best friend, were they ever a stranger? Of course they were a stranger once. Before they became your friend, you didn't know who they were. Even your brothers and sisters, before you had, while you were growing up, you didn't, they just looked like people walking into your visual field while you were an infant, and then you got close to them. So these categories of friends and enemies and even strangers are all not definite. They're indefinite. Change. Friends can become enemies. Enemies can become friends. Strangers can become friends and enemies. And even friends and enemies can eventually become strangers when you haven't seen them in a long time. I might have told you a story. The first time I came to Asheville was about 20 years ago. I was teaching Buddhism at a center in Knoxville, Tennessee. Came over the Smokies. I said, wow, this is nice. It's a lot cooler than the hot plains. It was late summer, I think, in Tennessee. And there was a lady who greeted me at the gate of her house. She was the sponsor of the course that I was going to give a weekend seminar. And she looked at me and smiled. And she said, "You don't recognize me, do you, George?" And I said, "No." And she said, "We knew each other very well a long time ago." And I'm trying to think, what meditation course or whatever. Turns out when she was using her married name now, but I knew her by her maiden name. She had been my last girlfriend before I left the States, like 20 years before that. And so here's someone who had been a friend, was now a stranger. Do you see the point? I hadn't seen her in such a long time. Many people, in many ways, if you talk about in a deeper sense of Buddhism, accepts the existence of reincarnation. That this is not the only life that we live. We have been born again and again in the past and will be born again and again in the future. All of the people that we now see have been intimately related with us in the past. All of them at one time or another have been our mother, not just once, many, many times. Every single person, strangers, enemies, of course, friends. Our present mother has been our mother numberless times in the past. So from that kind of reasoning also, opening up your heart, feeling a warmth toward others, heartwarming feeling when you see them of endearment. One of my teachers, I mentioned before, one of my teachers, one great Tibetan teacher, Atisha, when he came to Tibet, he was from India, and he was seen by his disciples at the window of his little hut, looking at the field where the cows were grazing and saying, "Mother," even recognizing the cows intellectually, they've been my mother. Look at what they're experiencing now, feeling compassion, wishing that they were free of that. So there are many different methods that you can use to enhance compassion in meditation. Even reciting the mantra that we did at the beginning, the Venerable led us in, the mantra of the Buddha of compassion. It was called Avalokiteshvara, Om Mani Padme Hum. Remember we recited that mantra. It's said that concentrating on those syllables within a state where you try to develop compassion can enhance your compassion. You can try that sometime. Tibetans, very simple Tibetan people, always reciting. They carry their rosary with them, and always walking around like that. Tibetans are known very, very much as just naturally, the race seems to be very compassionate. Not as though it's in their genes, in their chromosomes, but perhaps because of that very basic practice that everyone does. Okay, so let's finish. We've got about 5 minutes. Let's finish with a little meditation again on compassion. So sit comfortably. Relax your body. relax your mind, which means when I say relax your mind, let go of any thoughts of anything that you have to do later or anything that you're currently engaged in. And just bring to mind the thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if all living beings, friends, enemies, strangers, all of them were free of suffering and the causes of suffering? Use whatever of the reasonings that I've mentioned during the talk this afternoon that resonated with you. See, in analyzing like that, if you can get a feeling arising that pervades all beings, regardless of whether you might consider them friends, enemies, or strangers, it would be good for myself, for them. We're equal. They've been my mother. They can become my friend again in the future, whatever reason you use. And if you get that feeling, try to hold it in your mind with concentration. Leave a habit energy of meditation in your mind. You can envision other beings around you. Imagine particularly in front your enemies, anyone who pushes your buttons, so to speak. It irritates you. You might not call them enemy, but that you don't feel particularly comfortable to be around. Put your friends and loved ones behind you so they're not prominent in your mind, but you're still cognizant of their presence. And all filling all the space, all other beings, animals, dogs, Martians, other human beings, hell beings, gods. And just see if you can pervade all of them with this, like a accepting, opening heart. How wonderful it would be if they were all free of suffering and the causes of suffering. And as you can kind of recognize, there's an effect of having thought this way. Continuity, even when you forget about it, the mind is kind of been folded in this compassionate way. The imprint has been left in your mind. Make a dedication, make a strong resolution that in whatever way this unfolds, the imprint that we left in our mind today, the virtuous actions we've done, may they become the cause of my continued spiritual growth. Day by day, week by week, year by year, life by life. May I develop good heart as a result of this and benefit all living beings. Thank you very much. Pleasure to have you here. If you're new, there's a class that is given on Fridays that you're welcome to come to on investigating the psychology of the mind, called Mind and Mental Factors. Although it's meant to be, one class after another, you're welcome. While I'm here, I'm just here for the next 5 weeks. You're welcome to come and drop in. I think Professor Robert Thurman is teaching, if you haven't heard, tomorrow evening at the Unitarian Church. There might be someone here might be able to tell you if there are tickets available. Come again next Sunday. There are. And pleasure to meet you. Take care.